Good afternoon. Welcome to Protecting Sensitive Data and Minimizing Fraud Through an Integrated Approach. My name is Kathy Zelnick. I'm with FSA. I am the Chief Risk Officer. Dr. Michael Dean was supposed to be a presenter this afternoon, but unfortunately his throat had other ideas, so I'm going to be taking on both his piece and my piece. So welcome to our presentation. I'm really excited to share with you today some additional information you guys can take back to your schools about cyber and fraud risk, as well as a little bit about enterprise risk management. Our agenda today is we're going to cover our objectives. I'm going to give you a little bit of a primer on ERM. My colleague Wally Coy is going to talk to you about cybersecurity, and my colleague Stephanie Powell is going to talk to you about fraud risk management. Hold on. All right. So I'm going to, I actually just covered this slide. I'm going to move on. So at your institution, your schools face a variety of risks. And you guys do this because you have objectives and goals that you want to set into place to help your students thrive at your schools. And managing risk, it's really important that you specifically identify the types of risks you're willing to take on, the level of risk within those risk types that you're willing to take on, and specifically start to understand some of the trade-offs that you're making when you make decisions on how it is you're going to implement the things that you want to do to help your students be successful. Your institutions, some of the risks that your institutions are facing, the traditional financial risks, making sure that your institution can continue to do business, getting students their financial aid resources. I know that you've got enrollment risks. You've got compliance risks, some of it federal, some of it mandated by the state. And in this environment, we have new risks. There are new ways now to deliver education, and so you've got a competition that's a little bit different than it's been in the past. You've got folks out there scrutinizing the actual value of education, and that's something new. There's also been a rise on campus security concerns, some scandals that have plagued you, some things going on in your athletic programs, and those kinds of things. So the bottom line is there's a whole bunch of uncertainty that you guys face, some challenges that you face as you try to execute the work that you do day in and day out. And we can't do it in a silo. So enterprise risk management is about taking a holistic approach to recognizing risk. First, a couple of definitions. Risk is the possibility that events will occur that affect the achievement of your strategy and objectives. It's not all bad. Risk is really, and when you boil it down, it just represents uncertainty. I know that there is a kind of an old stigma around risk to always avoid it, but in fact, you may want to introduce some uncertainty into some of your processes when you look at the outcome that you could potentially achieve. Risk management is just about managing risks across your organization at different levels of altitude. But the enterprise risk management system is about all of it. It's the culture. Are we risk aware? Are we willing to have candid conversations about risks? It's the capabilities. It's, do we understand what risk is? Are we training folks? Do we understand the kinds of techniques that we can use to talk about risk? And it's about the practices. It's about developing risk registers. It's about having committees. It's about establishing governance. And it's always tethered to your strategy, and it's always tethered to performance. The old paradigm was risk kind of sat over here. If the auditors came in and found something, then there was risk and it was theirs to find. And if they didn't find anything, oh goody, maybe there is no risk. ERM is about embracing risk, embracing change, uncertainty, and understanding that it makes a lot of sense to take on uncertainty to try to help your students get through your programs and be successful. ERM is a mission-oriented, holistic approach to risk management. It covers all altitudes, but it aggregates up at that enterprise level. It encourages a risk-aware culture. And more importantly, it's forward-looking. It recognizes that you are not operating your institutions in an environment that doesn't change. You continue to face internal and external pressures and factors and things changing around you that change the way that you look at risk and help you set objectives. Oh, I was off a slide. It also includes risks, all kinds of different kinds of risks. As I mentioned earlier, there's the traditional financial, regulatory risks that you face, but the reputation risk is starting to kind of take a big turn, and it provides an opportunity to look at risk through a little bit of a different lens. And there's also strategic risk, making sure that the processes and things that you take on actually fulfill your mission. I have an example of a commercial company that set a goal that really wasn't in line with their mission. The gentleman who was CEO of Bush Beans one day was in his office, and he looked out on the parking lot and saw a fleet of trucks. And he said, "Our mission is to be the best bean maker. We're not in the delivery business." And they immediately closed down that line of business and secured that service to a third-party vendor and was able to focus more on beans. And so as you all are looking at your institutions and setting your strategic goals and objectives, I think the very first risk lens you should look through is making sure that the activities that you're pursuing are in fact aligned with your mission. Another opportunity for you to discuss risk is to recognize that there are many different ways for you all to achieve a specific target, and each of those different ways has a different risk profile. If you do things faster, for example, sometimes you might introduce risks associated with errors, and so you have to recognize the trade-offs when you're setting your strategic direction. And then, of course, the last dimension of risk through which you might view the work that you do is more operational. You've made a decision, and now you're trying to understand at that level what uncertainty you've actually taken on. So ERM is kind of the broad look at risk. And what I wanted to do is just share with you that here at FSA, that's what we're doing. We're trying to look at the risks that we are facing as we help you all help our students be successful. But there are two significant risks I know that you all face, and we wanted to get into that with more detail. And so I'm going to introduce my colleague, Wally Coy. Oh, and I think there you go.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm Wally Coy. I'm responsible for enterprise cyber risk management at Federal Student Aid. Work for Kathy. And what I'd like to do is first go over some definitions, because people, even people in my profession, tend to use a lot of terms interchangeably, sometimes by accident, sometimes because they have their ideas of what the definitions are. And I wanted to go over the differences between a threat, a vulnerability, a risk. These are the basic definitions that are used in the field of risk management, cyber risk management, fraud risk management, any aspect of risk management. The federal government follows the National Institute of Standards and Technology's guidance documents as far as all things dealing with cybersecurity and technology risk management. So I pulled these definitions basically from NIST. A threat, first of all, threats are something that always exists. There's a universe of threats. They're human, they're environmental, or they're natural. A natural threat could be a freak blizzard, a snowstorm, a forest fire like California has been having recently. Environmental threats are things that happen in your facility to your resources. Networks go down, facilities may have floods, they may have building collapses, there may be fires, there may be a terrorist attack, for example. And human threats can be characterized into human intentional and human unintentional. Intentional threats can be malicious action or deliberate actions to steal data, compromise data, which may facilitate fraud and a financial crime. And unintentional actions are somebody just making a mistake. For cybersecurity, it could be misconfiguring a server or a device which could lead to eventual cyber compromise. Vulnerabilities are your susceptibility to the universe of threats and threat actors. It can be deficiencies in internal controls, which may lead to a commission of a fraud. It can be deficiencies in security procedures, or just the lack of procedures or lack of standardization for technical compliance and technical standards for your IT infrastructure. And risk is basically the product of the probability or function of the probability and the impact of an event being realized. Once an event is realized, it's no longer a risk, it's an issue or an event that has to be treated and addressed and managed, such as a cyber breach. The consequences of a cyber breach can be numerous. The most obvious one, or probably the one that comes to mind first for most folks, is identity theft. Personally identifiable information is compromised, and this seems to be happening with greater frequency, not only in the education sector, but in all sectors of our economy. Banking, even federal government had a major compromise of PII and personnel records. That is probably the most applicable one in our environment. There's another one is basically corruption of records. An example might be if someone can successfully execute a ransomware attack. Baltimore City comes to mind, and they lost records, and they were never able to reconstruct records and billing records for utility bills and water bills and tax bills and things like that. That can be very costly. Denial of service is not as prevalent of an attack or a consequence of a cyber breach, but it's still something that happens where access to resources are denied, websites are disabled, for example. But reputation damage is sort of the culmination of a successful cyber breach or attack, and that also has its own consequences and its own path to recover from. There is good news, though, and that 90% of your cyber threats can be mitigated, or cyber risk can be mitigated through cyber hygiene and user awareness. And I'm going to cover the basics that would address 90% of your security threats. This is an obligatory slide here. In terms of responsibility for cyber risk management, it's the entire organization. You all most likely are in operational roles and tactical roles. You see stuff, you understand how things work. You're probably the front line. You're the front line in identifying if there are deficiencies in security or procedures or controls that need to be addressed. So a challenge to the educational sector is that this sector tends to spend the least on cybersecurity of all the major economic sectors in the United States. And this example is for firms in the sector, including schools, with $1 billion in gross revenue. That's a small percentage of the institutions. I would wager that smaller institutions spend even less as a percentage of their revenue. So that is a challenge, and that's also why it's important to focus on the top threat vectors, the 90 to 95% of the threats that will compromise your systems, because they're probably the 5 or 10% remaining you're not going to be able to do anything about, because the resources of the threat actors you will not be able to counter. But the good news is you can cover 9 out of 10. Human behavior is the greatest vulnerability. People making mistakes, people clicking on a link in an email that they shouldn't click on, infecting a system and potentially having an infection propagate to the network, leading to ransomware attack or someone exfiltrating data. Network connectivity, and I'll get into this a little later, that's connectivity of your smartphones and your tablet devices and PCs through networks which may not be trusted, including the hotel networks here. You don't know if you're really connecting to the hotel network. There's no authentication. There's no assurance that there isn't somebody between you and the network reading your data. Endpoint devices, if you get compromised, it will be through a PC, a laptop, a smartphone, or a tablet. It's going to come from an end user device. There was a time when this was not the case, and compromises were through networks and firewalls and back-end systems of the computers, but now it's going to be the endpoint. That's the most likely path. Authentication or deficiencies in authentication are also exploited by threats. Weak passwords, passwords that can be easily guessed, and also not using two-factor authentication where you probably should for high-value systems and administrative access systems like database administrators and such. Number 5 is app stores. Not all the apps you download on iTunes or Google's software, was it Google Play or Google Software Store, are secure. There are always cases where you may download an app that is not legitimate or has vulnerabilities, or even legitimate applications like social media apps routinely have discovered vulnerabilities that can be exploited to compromise your smartphone, to ultimately compromise the back-end data in your systems. I mentioned human behavior as the #1 threat earlier, but the way human behavior will most likely be exploited if you are compromised is through phishing attacks. The cost to execute a phishing attack is very low. You could send hundreds or thousands of emails and somebody responds, and all you need to do as an adversary is compromise one machine, and then you can move to the next machine and move to other points in the system. But responding to texts that are nefarious, requesting you to validate your identity or your access will be lost, for example, are very common. Spy phishing attacks, where you may receive an email and it looks legitimate and there is a link and you click it again. It may be one of these, your password's about to expire. It may be something personal, like your bank account will be locked unless you re-authenticate. You click on the link, your system is infected with something called a keylogger, which installs itself on your machine, and a virus detector will probably not detect the keylogger. The keylogger records every keystroke on your machine. The value of that is eventually you're going to type a password and ID, and the keylogger is going to get it, and they're going to compromise your identity. There are phishing attacks using phone calls. I don't know about you folks in the audience, but I constantly get these calls saying that the IRS has a warrant out for my arrest, and that I need to call them back right away. I called them back once just for fun, and they said I could settle my debt with iTunes cards. And I said, all right, well, yeah, I'll see you later. I'll send them to you. So so someone could also do this and impersonate. They could impersonate federal student aid. We think your account's been compromised. We need to verify your credentials for access to COD or something, or one of our platforms. So they work, which is why they keep doing them. Farming is a technique where I know at Federal Student Aid, there are common websites that we always go to. I'm in security, I go to certain security websites daily. You all go to certain affinity websites and groups and list servers and things like that. You mistype your address, and you think you went to your site. It looks just like your site. You click on links, your machine is infected. those are also very common techniques. Similar are watering hole attacks, a site you're always logged into. Typically, someone may compromise a legitimate site that your school uses, and you may not know it, the website owner may not know it, and they use that to gather information, your login credentials and things. And so this is out of human behavior threat vectors. If they're going to get you, they're going to get you through a phishing attack. That's been our experience. All right, and say they can't phish you because you're really smart and your school has test emails that they send out. And I know a lot of you all do send out, your IT staff sends out test emails and to try to educate folks and not to click on every email that looks like, it might be of interest. If they can't phish you, they're going to try to guess your password. There's software tools out there on the dark web where pretty much any password anybody has ever used is available, and it's available for brute force guessing attacks and such. And then make sure you don't fall on this top 25 list, because they'll try those passwords for sure. And I'm sure nobody has any of these passwords. As a result of the problems with passwords being guessed, and there's another problem with passwords, and I think we kind of caused it ourselves. The technology community, and every website has a different protocol. One banking site I go to says you need an uppercase, at least one uppercase, one lowercase, a number, a special character, and it's got to be at least 8 characters long, so I enter something. Oh, well, the tilde is not an accepted special character. It's like, all right, then I put the question mark. It's like, so now I know how to guess your password. You're only using one of 4 special characters. There's an uppercase, there's a lowercase, and there's software that can be set up to guess your password, and you're not going to remember it. I use the example here, Go Tigers. It has a special character, 2 special characters, uppercase, it has a number, I forgot, a lot of them require numbers too. I could probably remember that one, but what NIST has published in new guidance is, and a new way to do this is they recommend passphrases, courage run, spring play. It's a long phrase. If somebody tries to brute force guess this, they're going to get locked out of your account. No one's going to guess this in 10 tries. So this is sort of the new way to go. Unfortunately, many systems can't accommodate something like that. They're still going to say, oh, no spaces, special characters, but not the tilde, not the question. But this is direction we're going in. If possible, try to use a passphrase, a long one that you remember that doesn't really mean anything. I mean, this is just a collection of words. And longer is better, and NIST is even saying up to 64 characters. I don't think you need a 64-character password. I'd say, I don't know, a dozen or so is probably enough. All right. So if they're successful in phishing you, or they do manage to guess your password, this is what they're going to try to do. They're going to try to do an account takeover attack, an ATO. They're going to start with one user's email. They're not going to reveal themselves. They're going to have access to your email, but you won't know it because they've compromised your password or the email server, for example. They're going to remain on the system and monitor what you do. Are you an important person? Are you a student? Are you the director of financial aid? Probably a good target. And they're going to watch your communications, other people you talk to. So they might be able to launch other phishing attacks based on information they learn about you in your emails that they may send to folks you normally communicate with and say, yeah, this must be Kathy. She sent me this email. She knows about the loan file I've been examining or something. And so they'll try to exploit other accounts. And ultimately, the goal is to get as much information as possible, compromise as many accounts as possible, not get caught, Maybe you have some spreadsheets in your emails, saved emails. They'll exfiltrate those spreadsheets. Though those spreadsheets, if they contain PII and student records, social security numbers, bank account numbers, routing numbers, they'll use that to steal funds. It may not be right away, but they'll use that data, and they have all the time in the world to explore all these different identities and different accounts. They'll repeat this as often as they can, not just in your school and other schools. They'll keep trying until eventually they get discovered, or they may never get discovered. I won't talk about it, but even more sophisticated attacks, after an account takeover, they'll try to take over accounts of your business partners and your stakeholders that deal with your organization. They'll try to compromise vendor emails. And just keep going, and they may get a long way without getting caught, and this is the way they will attempt to perpetrate fraud and actually steal money. Earlier, I mentioned networks. You don't know if your network is secure if you're at Starbucks or if you're in a hotel. Be very careful what you do over Wi-Fi that's untrusted. It's not your school's Wi-Fi. It's some Wi-Fi at a store, whether it's McDonald's or something. Try not to send emails using that Wi-Fi. Maybe you surf the web on your own machine, but try not to do business on untrusted Wi-Fi networks. That goes a long way. And also, you have to educate your student population and even parent population, because students will be a vector of attack. Mobile endpoints are notoriously insecure. There was a study. This study was done this year. I think some of these numbers are worse than what they actually reported. 50% of smartphone users don't use passcodes. It means if their phone is found, you own their identity. And these days, I think your cell phone number is more valuable in identifying you than your social security number, because everybody needs that phone number to text you. So you don't want somebody to have your cell phone and access to your number. Students especially tend to surf the web a lot and go to a lot of social media sites, and they go to hundreds of unique IPs. And the more addresses you go to, the more likely one of those websites is not a friendly site, and it could infect your endpoint. A third of mobile traffic is unencrypted. That means the email's not encrypted. Well, you may not know, SMS texting is not encrypted. 100% of the applications they tested, and I think they looked at financial applications as an example, had at least one vulnerability that could compromise device security and the user's data associated with that application. So this is the new hunting ground for hackers. It's smartphones. It's getting someone to download a nefarious app, and they can move on from there. The good news is, and these are things that you should be looking for. If you're not doing, ask your technology people, ask your senior management, your executive management about these things. You should have a documented security policy, documented controls everybody has to follow. If you don't have it, you should put one together. Two-factor authentication for users that have access to databases, records of entire student populations, for example, in critical applications. Your organization should be conducting vulnerability scanning, either in-house or by hiring someone to do it. There are firms that do it over the internet. There are firms like Qualys, for example. They do a lot of work for the government. You should execute occasional penetration tests on your systems. Now, if you're not seeing these, you're not aware of these are things to raise with your technology leadership as well as your administrative leadership. Incident response plans should be in place. I say contingency plans, but more important is backup plans. Dan Commons in a session earlier, we talked about ransomware. I don't know if you all may have had a chance to attend, but a good backup isolated from your online systems is the sole preventive measure against a ransomware attack. You have a copy of good data, you don't have to pay the ransomware criminal, and you can recover your systems. As far as detecting, responding, and recovering from a breach, everyone will eventually experience some sort of cyber breach. Just as individually, I'm sure the majority of us, if not all of us, have experienced some sort of identity breach, whether it's from a credit card company, an insurance company, numerous vectors. And this goes back to reputation risk. How you handle the incident, post-incident, is probably as important or more important as how you try to prevent the incident. We're all know of major examples of major corporations, Fortune 50, Fortune 500 companies that had breaches, didn't notify their customers on a timely basis, and a lot of reputation risk and embarrassment was suffered, and it also attracted unwanted regulator scrutiny and oversight. So the most important part of incident response plans is, are they practiced? You all should probably be involved in tabletop exercises, for example, where you walk through the process of what are we going to do. Say we had our student records database compromised and it contained the following information and we don't know where it's been exfiltrated. You should have an exercise to work through the process as to how you would address that, recover from it, report it, and do whatever is necessary. It's very important. Testing of backups. Backups are worthless unless you know you can actually recover them. There are numerous organizations that back up data. They have a disaster, they have a ransomware attack, and then they realize that backups are useless. And there were format problems, communications problems, so testing backups is very, very, very important. And again, if you're not seeing this, ask questions of your technology people and your school administration saying, well, we should be doing testing as backups. Do we ever test backups of my systems? You know, that kind of thing. But it's very important. This is a summary of closing points. You all will have access to the slides. I won't rehash this. The one point I do want to make is that the basics will get you 90% there. Everyone should be doing basic cyber hygiene. Education and awareness against phishing attacks is probably the #1 mitigant against cyber threats. And those are probably the takeaway points. And what will happen is if somebody compromises your data, your PII, your systems, your business partners, your vendors, your students, they ultimately likely will move on to try to steal money, either from the student, an individual account, from the university, from the government. And Stephanie Powell covers our compliance and fraud risk management area, and she's going to tell you all about the fun stuff that happens in the fraud arena. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Wally. So, as Wally mentioned, I focus on fraud and compliance risk at FSA. And in a former life, I sat where you sit and was a financial aid director as well. So I certainly understand what you're facing on a day-to-day basis. Let's start with a few examples of what kind of money are we talking about when fraud is committed in the financial aid arena. So we have $25 million resulting from 126 distance education schemes. Those schemes use stolen identities, prisoners, straw students, and other techniques to illegally obtain financial aid funds. We had a purchasing director at a university that stole more than $650,000 with a purchasing card by altering or creating fake credit card statements. There was a president of a school that embezzled money from roughly 260 students that totaled over $900,000. There was a doctoral candidate that was one of 7 defendants giving kickbacks to a financial aid director for unjustified financial aid payments, and that conspiracy totaled roughly $1.4 million. So I'm sure many of you are thinking we're kind of in the wrong line of business. All right, so all of those stories have in common, obviously, fraud. So what is fraud? Let's define it. And because we're the feds, of course, we thought an acronym would be helpful to help you remember what fraud stands for. It's financial reward acquired using deception. Basically, you're obtaining something of value through lying. Now, you have 9 million things that you have to pay attention to on a daily basis. So, obviously, it's a good idea to think about fraud and to work on identifying it. But is this something you really have to focus on? Is this something you have to report? And the answer to that question is yes. Under regulatory guidance, you are required to report to the Inspector General any credible information that you have on an applicant or a fellow administrator that indicates that fraud is occurring. So who are your potential fraudsters? If you think back to those examples we talked about at the beginning, fraudsters come in a lot of different forms. There were applicants, there were current students, there were your colleagues in the financial aid office, presidents of schools. So really anyone that's even tangentially related to something of value can be a potential fraudster. So what leads someone to cross the line? Otherwise, people that probably have not ever committed a crime, what leads them to cross the line and commit one of these acts? And there really are 3 different factors that play into this. The first is opportunity, and this is where we have some control. The fraudster sees an opening, some lack of internal controls, lax rules, no oversight, and they're able to step in and take advantage of that opportunity. The other 2 factors lie with the fraudster. Motivation or pressure. So those are things like debt, perhaps gambling or drug problems. Maybe they want to have an excessive lifestyle. Any of those things can essentially motivate them or pressure them into committing fraud. And then the third factor is rationalization or attitude. This looks a little bit like, they don't really pay me what I'm worth, so I deserve this money. It's a small amount. They're never going to miss it. I'm only borrowing it for a short time. I'll repay it. So given all of that, given the potential fraudsters in our midst, and those factors that may lead into them committing fraud, what do we do about it? And you really are on the front lines here. Prevention and detection largely lie with you and your teams. Prevention is the security guard. This is what prevents people from getting beyond that gate. It's your internal controls, separation of duties. For example, typically if you're in the financial aid office issuing financial aid, you're not also in the bursar's office handing out checks. It's retaining and training your staff, properly handling documents, shredding sensitive information, using key identifiers that are not a social security number. Wally talked a lot about the importance of password protection, not only having them, but them being effective. Reviewing and auditing access privileges. If someone leaves, do you shut down their accounts? Do you know who you're actually talking with? Just because someone calls in and says, "Hi, I'm Johnny Smith," is it actually Johnny that you're speaking with? Now, we can't prevent all fraud. Fraudsters always seem to be a step or two ahead of us. So you also have to continue by focusing on detection. Can you recognize the anomalies or common characteristics that indicate something's not quite right here? Are you reviewing documents thoroughly, asking questions, verifying their authenticity? Do you request additional information if something seems a little fishy? Are you able to compare information from different documents or sources? So here we have a list of potential red flags. Not all of these are necessarily related to processing a financial aid application, but a number of them are. If you are talking with students on the phone and they're unable to answer their challenge question, such as, "What is your birth date?" you should know that without having to look it up. Perhaps they show up long enough to get that financial aid refund check, but seem to disappear pretty quickly after that. If you see a number of students with the same IP addresses, same bank account routing numbers, the same physical or email address, all of those are indicators that fraud could be going on. So again, as we talked about earlier, what do you do if you detect these fraudulent activities or potentially fraudulent activities? You don't have to make a determination that they're fraudulent. You just have to raise your hand and say, "Hey, something doesn't seem quite right here." Here is what you want to do. You want to contact the Inspector General, and they have a hotline. I would also encourage you, there's another session that the Inspector General is presenting, focused on more of the details about what they do and how you can report fraud. I believe it's session 30, internal and external threats. So I definitely would encourage you to attend that as well if this is a topic you're interested in. But here's where you go. If you do see that suspicious activity, this should be your stop. And just one more side note about the Inspector General that I do want to point out is they do have a little bit different role than we do at FSA. FSA is very much, we have administrative authority, we conduct compliance reviews, but it's all administrative. The Inspector General is actually the arm that has the law enforcement authority. So they're conducting the criminal and civil investigations, or actually able to go after these fraudsters. So as the front lines on your campuses, I want you to be vigilant, skeptical when something seems suspicious, and not to be afraid to ask questions. Let's think back to those few examples we talked about at the beginning, the $25 million in distance education fraud rings, the $650,000 in fake purchase card transactions, $1.4 million from a conspiracy with a financial aid director, $900,000 in embezzled funds. The Inspector General was able to investigate and ultimately successfully prosecute those fraudsters because of the people just like you and the teams you have in place on your campuses. People who were paying attention, asked questions, and reported suspicious activities. So with that, we are going to be able to move in. Well, I do want to point out, we have our contact information is included in the slide. So if you have follow-up questions you're not able to get answered today, please don't hesitate to contact us. But we do have time for question and answers. We have a microphone in each aisle, so if you do have a question, if you'd like to come up and ask that now, we certainly welcome them. We also welcome talking with anyone afterwards if you're more comfortable doing that. Don't everyone rush the microphones at once, please. All right. Well, if there are no questions for the audience, we appreciate your time and attention today, and enjoy the rest of the conference.